My wife Jody thought it'd be fun to spend the night with another man, assuming I wouldn't mind. She was mistaken. Reflecting on our past, I remembered our high school days, how we mostly stuck to each other despite a few disagreements. We lost our pureness to each other before prom and got married shortly after graduation. I thought about this as I sat at my desk, sipping coffee and smiling. Jody, or Yodel as her real name, had always been special to me. My phone rang. Unsure of the caller, I hesitated. I often receive unknown numbers due to giving out my business card. Scam calls are a nuisance, especially those claiming to be from the IRS threatening legal action. Legitimate calls are tolerable, but regardless, when Jody's office number flashed, I answered, puzzled by why she'd call from there instead of her cell. "Hey there. I'm not your wife, sir. I'm Taylor, John Richard Taylor III, but you can call me Trey. Jody works in insurance. I sell high-end RVs. We're college dropouts, but we're getting by, living in my mom's house rent-free while we save up. We're happy where we are. I'm Michael Hamilton. I work with your wife." "What's up, Mr. Hamilton?" "I have info about Jody. Can we meet?" "What about?" "I think she's cheating. Meet me at Spike's at noon." "Sorry, not interested in jokes. Tell her I'm onto her." "It's not a joke. Spike's at noon. Gray suit, blue tie." Click. What just went down? Some random guy hinted I could stop my wife's affair if I met him. Not in the mood for jokes. Now I'm stuck. Do I meet him and risk getting pranked? What if it's not a joke? Damn. At noon, I stood outside Spike's. A man came up asking for John Taylor. We opted to stroll to Central Park for privacy. As we walked, I asked what was up. "I've been working with your wife for 2 months now. We're in the same department." I quickly caught wind of her closeness with a coworker named Stan Morrison. They lunched together daily, openly displaying their friendship. Today, the whole office heard them planning a night at the Hilton tomorrow. They're dining, dancing, and spending the night there. Even now, your wife's shopping for it. And how's she planning to justify this? She's banking on your love to let her explore with another man, believing it won't damage your marriage since you're her only past. She genuinely thinks it won't affect things. That's why they're so open about it. Why tell me? I was once married for 9 years. My wife cheated, and the legal system favored her. Now she and her lover live in a house I pay for, while I scrape by in a dingy apartment. This is my chance to help someone avoid my fate. After our conversation, he returned to work, leaving me to contemplate my marriage and future. If his words were true, my marriage seemed doomed. It frightened me how easily I entertained the idea of its destruction based solely on a brief chat with a stranger. Recalling my childhood, I remembered my mother's suffering. My father's problem, drinking, and infidelity haunted our family. He openly boasted about his affairs, even taunting my mother. When I was 11, he once took me to his girlfriend's house, leaving me with her dog while they were elsewhere in the house. Feeling uncomfortable, I walked a mile home and told my mother. Despite her distress, she didn't confront him. Afterward, he punished me harshly for a minor offense, but I suspected it was more for informing on him than for the accident with the kitchen plate. Given my upbringing and my mother's struggles, I couldn't fathom condoning Jody's potential affair. Even entertaining the thought was unbearable. You can call me names, but I refused to endure what my mother did. She eventually left my father, and life improved. Now facing a similar situation, I'm torn. Confront Jody or ignore the news. In sales, waiting isn't an option. You have to act. But here, knowing my product complicates things. If Hamilton's words hold truth, I don't know Jody at all, and she doesn't know me. I decided to take charge. But how do you act on uncertain ground? Consider every possibility, from best to worst. Then choose a path you can live with, accepting the consequences. I made a choice and decided to hire a private investigator. Picked one randomly from the phone book, called, and headed to his office within 30 minutes. After 2 hours and a hefty fee, we had a plan. Driving home, I pondered how to behave. Upon arrival, she greeted me as usual, but I struggled to act normal. Should I hint at what I knew or maintain the facade? Revealing my suspicion might derail her plans, but also risk her abandonment of them. Opting for normalcy, we had dinner, though it felt challenging. Despite my inner turmoil, she remained composed, either a skilled actress or genuinely unfazed. Later, she retired to bed early while I lay awake. At dawn, she left without our customary goodbye kiss. Unusual for a Friday, I called in sick and sought legal advice on divorce. The attorney warned against infidelity and referred me to his wife, a strict advocate for fidelity. I shared my talk with Michael Hamilton with her. Her first question, why involve a lawyer and investigator based on a stranger's tale? I explained my aversion to infidelity, rooted in my parents' history. She suggested confirming Hamilton's story and noted if Jody's as confident as he claims, she has little to lose by straying. I reiterated my zero tolerance for affairs, demanding Jody's return by Monday if she proceeds. She assured me paperwork would be ready. By 1 p.m., I was back at my desk, selling to a senior couple eyeing a motorhome. Despite initial hesitation, their lively demeanor dispelled doubts. The Jacobsons, nearing 50 years of marriage, exemplified the bond I desired. As they finalized their purchase, I offered a personal tree discount as a gesture of goodwill. They left happy, a glimpse of the future I hoped for with Jody. I contacted my investigator and confirmed readiness. At 5:30, I arrived home to find Jody's car parked as usual. Inside, no dinner scent lingered, indicating she hadn't started cooking. Remaining composed, I placed the package from the investigator on the mantelpiece and waited in the chair. Soon, Jody descended, stunning in attire matching what Hamilton had described. She carried an overnight bag. "You look amazing. What's the occasion?" I asked. "A coworker suggested we go out," she replied. "Like a date?" I pressed. "Yes," she confirmed. "And what kind of date?" I probed further. "We thought since you're my only past, I might be interested in exploring with someone else. Dinner, dancing, then a hotel," she admitted. I was astonished by her composure, while my own calm demeanor dissolved into a cold knot in my stomach. "You can't be serious. Spending the night with another man? I won't agree to that," I protested. "It's no big deal. Just one night," she brushed off. "If you go, our marriage is over," I declared firmly. A car horn interrupted us. "That's him," she announced, moving towards the door. I blocked her path, pleading with her to reconsider. Ignoring me, she attempted a kiss, then left. I switched off the recorder I had hidden and spent 2 hours clearing her belongings from our home, even taking her personal documents and jewelry. Then, unable to sleep, I busied myself with mundane tasks, unable to shake the turmoil. I was numb as I arrived at the dealership early. By 11 o'clock, I closed the deal with the Jacobsons and handled all necessary paperwork. At 11:45, I returned home with new keys from the locksmith. My investigator arrived with video recordings. By 12:30, I was reviewing the footage when the doorbell rang. Opening it, she queried about her key and car. I blocked her entry, explaining she no longer lived here, hence her key didn't work, and her car was outside because I didn't want it in my garage. "What are you saying? This is my home now, open up," she insisted, trying to push past me. "I warned you last night. If you leave with him, you're out. Your stuff's already in your car," I reminded her. She protested, but I cut her off by shutting the door. After a few minutes of pounding, I relented. "Keep it up and I'll call the cops," I threatened, though unsure of my legal standing. "This is my house," she argued. "Actually, it's owned by my parents, and they decide who stays. They've decided you're out," I countered, slamming the door again. Peering out the window later, I saw her sitting in her car. I headed to the kitchen for water, but opted for a gin and tonic instead. Watching another tape, I grew increasingly furious as the day progressed. The doorbell rang incessantly, irritating me further. Expecting Jody, I swung the door open to find her sister Judy leaning on the bell. "You're in prick! My sister's in tears! I want answers!" she accused. "Forget them," I thought, slamming the door. Slamming doors felt oddly therapeutic. When the bell rang again, I flung the door open, nearly catching Judy's hand. Threatening her, I began slamming the door again. She pleaded, pressing against the door. Relenting, I let her in, and she hesitated before speaking. "I thought you loved Jody. I can't believe you kicked her out over such a stupid disagreement," Judy exclaimed. "Stupid disagreement?" "She said you argued about the walk last night and threw her out," I replied. "She's right about the disagreement. She wanted to go out, and I didn't," I admitted. "Did she mention it was with a guy from work?" I questioned. "You're kidding," she gasped. "And she planned dinner, dancing, then a hotel stay," I revealed, playing the audio tape. "I had no idea," Judy admitted. "What now? Divorce?" she asked. "No chance of reconciliation," I replied firmly. After Judy left, I wallowed in self-pity, eating grilled cheese and drinking gin and tonic, consumed by despair. Judy knocked on the door, reminding me of my threat to break her fingers if she rang the bell again. She explained she'd been talking to Jody all day, confirming my account. Jody admitted to their date, but insisted nothing happened. Inviting Judy in, we sat down. I asked for clarification. Jody confessed they drank champagne, got too drunk for their plans, and passed out. Realizing her mistake, she had him take her home. That's quite a tale. You trust her, don't you? I believe they spent time together, grew close, and planned this date meticulously. It's a betrayal beyond love. You don't believe her, do you? No, I don't. And forgiveness? Not a chance. As we reached the door, she hesitated. Can we still be friends after this? Jody and I are divorcing. It'll be messy. You may not like me afterward. I understand. I might miss you, she admitted, kissing my cheek before leaving. Since Saturday afternoon, my phone had been mostly off. Jody attempted to reach me several times, but eventually gave up. I spoke with her father, who tried to downplay the situation, but I explained it to him as I did to Judy. He understood divorce was unavoidable. On Monday, I immediately contacted my attorney to inform her about the weekend and instructed her to serve Jody with a summons, either at work or at her sister's. By 4 p.m., my phone rang, displaying Jody's office number. I decided to answer. Trey Taylor. Good afternoon, Mr. Taylor. This is Michael Hamilton. Thought you'd like to know there was quite a scene here earlier. Oh, really? Yes, indeed. Your wife got served with a summons, and she fainted. Paramedics came, took her to the hospital. Stan Morrison found the papers, nearly fainted himself. Not exactly funny, given the circumstances. I'll keep you updated on what happens. Appreciate it. Phone rang again. Judy. Hey, Jody's in the hospital. Thanks for letting me know. You're cold-hearted, Trey. My heart's icy, Judy, thanks to your sister. I warned you this was coming. The following weeks were rough. Jody tried reaching out, but I ignored her. Her parents attempted to intervene, but I refused. Mom tried to cheer me up, though I insisted I was fine. Michael Hamilton called often, offering support. He was the only one privy to my knowledge about Morrison. Jody showed up for work but remained seated most of the time, except during meetings with her lawyer. There was no interaction between Jody and Morrison, at least not publicly. As for me, I was simply delaying. A meeting was arranged with our lawyers, Jody and myself, the first time I'd seen her since she left. I noticed she appeared thinner and tired. Judy's unexpected presence surprised me. When Jody's lawyer inquired if everything was all right, I questioned Judy's presence. She insisted she was there for Jody, and although it wasn't what I asked, I allowed her to stay. Once seated, Jody's lawyer commenced the meeting. Mrs. Taylor firmly denies the alleged infidelity and requests dismissal of the divorce petition to work on saving the marriage. She's open to counseling if it helps. My lawyer and I exchanged smiles. If there was no infidelity, my lawyer asked, can Mrs. Taylor explain her actions that night? We all turned to her. Certainly. A friend came to pick me up. Does he have a name? My lawyer inquired. Yes, but it's irrelevant. Since nothing wrong occurred, there's no need to involve him. I left the house and got into his car. She recounted what Judy had told her, similar to what Judy had told me. Champagne dinner, more drinks, too intoxicated for anything else. That's my interpretation. Both passed out, woke up, and returned home, where her husband kicked her out. I made a mistake. I love my husband and want his forgiveness so we can have a future together. I glanced at Judy, who nodded in agreement with each word. Let's say everything you've said is true and no lovemaking occurred. Was there any inappropriate touching? My lawyer asked. Absolutely not, Jody asserted firmly. Judy nodded in agreement. My lawyer and I exchanged glances. A remote control lay in front of me. I pressed play, and a screen descended from the ceiling, showing Jody and Stan sharing a passionate kiss in our driveway before driving off together. Lie number 1, I announced to the room. Jody appeared pale and Judy stared at her sister. On Thursday, after speaking with Michael Hamilton, my investigator and I devised a plan to record Jody's actions on Friday night, starting with Stan Morrison's arrival. With Hamilton's information, we knew their date location and even the room number they had booked. Fortunately, we were able to capture the entire incident, I explained. You confirmed there was no inappropriate touching. Yes, she replied tentatively. I pressed play again. We witnessed Morrison's hand lingering on Jody's rear as they were seated at the Hilton's dining room. Lie number 2, I stated. Jody's lawyer focused on the divorce petition, while Judy seemed engrossed in her fingernails. The video revealed Jody and Morrison ordering champagne before abruptly leaving for the elevator. It cost me $1,000 to secure access to their suite, where Jody was soon entertaining him. Jody screamed and fled the room, followed by Judy. I paused the video. My client seems to have misremembered the events. I'll speak with her and get back to you, her attorney said, collecting her papers and hurrying after them. After chatting with my lawyer, I returned to the dealership. Just before closing, Judy approached my booth. I remained silent. "May I sit down?" she asked. "Feel free." We sat in silence until she finally spoke up. "You knew, didn't you?" "Knew what?" "When I visited your house that first Saturday, you already knew they were involved." "Yes, I saw the video before you arrived. They weren't just involved, Judy. She's my wife and she cheated. Why didn't you tell me?" "I hoped she'd come clean and agree to a divorce. I didn't want your family to know. I always liked your parents," she admitted. More silence ensued. My phone rang and I answered it immediately. "Trey Taylor, this is Michael Hamilton. Your wife called and quit yesterday, didn't even clear her desk." "Thanks. Keep me updated." Judy tried to speak, but was interrupted by a call on line 6. After handling the call, we exchanged glances. "She's gone, Trey." "What do you mean, gone?" "Dead. She packed up and left." "I doubt it. She asked me to tell Mom and Dad she's sorry." "It wasn't just them." "Yeah, we know." Silence. "I have work to do," I said. "Oh yeah, sorry," Judy apologized, then left. That night, I watched the investigator's videotape. No romance, just betrayal. I felt a mix of pain and anger. My thoughts were chaotic. I fell asleep in my chair, tormented by it all. Since meeting Jody, she's always been on my mind when I think about lovemaking. 2 weeks passed, and my lawyer attempted to arrange another meeting with Jody and her lawyer, but without success. Jody was nowhere to be found. Months went by with no word from her. I kept in touch with Judy and her parents, but they hadn't heard from her either. I considered hiring an investigator to find her, but my lawyer advised against it. I canceled the credit cards and withdrew half the money, but she hasn't touched the remaining funds. If she remains missing for a few more months, we could file for desertion. But we'll wait and see. The phone rang. "Trey Taylor." "Good morning, Mr. Taylor. It's Michael Hamilton. Remember me?" "Of course I do. How's everything going?" "Not bad. I wanted to update you. Remember my divorce?" "Yes, your ex was living with her boyfriend in your house." "Exactly. Well, turns out the guy's a thief. He convinced her to steal from her company, and now they're both in jail." "Well, serves them right." "Are you still at the same job?" "Yes, that's why I called. Since your wife left, it's been quiet. But Stan Morrison's recent calls have been interesting." "How so?" "He was talking to your wife today." "How do you know?" "He said, 'I miss you too, Jody.'" "Did you catch any hints about her whereabouts? I need her to sign divorce papers." "I have the number she called from." "Impressive. Thanks, Mr. Hamilton. Keep me updated." "Will do." He gave me the number and I passed it to my lawyer. The area code was South Florida. I decided to make the call. "Hello?" "Hey, Judy, it's Trey. Got a minute?" "Sure, what's up?" "Do you or your family have connections in Florida?" "Why do you ask?" "I believe Jody is there." "Why does her location matter to you?" "I'm filing for divorce and she needs to sign the papers to expedite the process." "When will you ask?" "Ask what? Where in Florida she lives?" "I don't need to ask. My lawyer is already on it." "But if it helps, she's in Fort Lauderdale." "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" Over the next few days, we talked multiple times. Judy provided Jody's address and informed her about the pending divorce papers. I relayed the address to my lawyer, who promptly sent the documents. Judy and I planned to have dinner that Friday and watch the video afterward. She made it clear that seeking revenge wasn't an option, especially involving her brother-in-law. Thursday morning at work, I got a call from Michael Hamilton. "Hey, Trey. Wanted to fill you in on something. Stan Morrison just up and quit his job. No notice, nothing. Said he's moving to Florida." Well. That's quite the news. Thanks for letting me know, Michael. By the way, how have you been?" "Doing all right. My wife admitted to the theft and took a plea deal. She'll get a light sentence, but her boyfriend's in for a long haul. Hopefully he'll find himself some company." We shared a laugh and wrapped up the call. Then I phoned Judy. "Hey, was just thinking about you," she answered. "How long have you known Stan Morrison was moving to Fort Lauderdale?" I don't think she knew I knew his name. There was a long silence. "Judy, how long have you known Trey?" A few days." "How many times have they seen each other since she moved in?" "Trey, listen, how many times have they met since she moved there?" After a pause, she replied, 4. She's visited twice, and he's gone there twice. They've seen each other 4 times, that you know of, and you were okay with her still seeing him? And you were okay with her coming back to me after all that? Trey, she's my sister." And with that, I hung up. My phone rang again. It was Judy. I ignored it. In the next 3 calls, I stayed in my cubicle for a bit before heading to the repair shop, where I enjoyed chatting with the mechanics. One of them was a good friend. He retired from the Army last year due to injuries sustained in Iraq. His left leg and 2 fingers on his left hand were injured. Only he and my boss knew about my situation at the dealership. We sat outside at the employee picnic table and I filled him in. "I can make sure it doesn't reach Florida if you want." "No, it's not worth risking jail over. I just want her gone." "I can make that happen too." I chuckled. "Nah, living with myself is punishment enough." We talked more until we heard over the loudspeaker, "Trey, line 4. Back at my cubicle. "Trey Taylor." "Trey, please don't hang up." I hung up and told the receptionist not to take any more calls. On my street, I saw Judy's car parked outside my house. I pulled into the garage, closing the door before she reached it. She knocked on the front door, remembering my threat about ringing the bell. Inside, I warmed up some spaghetti and meatballs and headed to bed. By 10 p.m., I was asleep. The following morning, I got ready for work and encountered Judy waiting for me, likely expecting no confrontation. However, I confronted her, expressing my frustration at her complicity in Jody's affair with Morrison. Afterward, I spent hours at the dealership, contemplating my next steps. Despite the tension, I made it through the day and eventually headed home. My mom invited me for dinner, and we enjoyed Italian food together. However, things took a serious turn when she mentioned Judy. I warned her not to bring up the family again or I'd leave. She then revealed that Jody is pregnant, a bombshell that left me stunned. Feeling betrayed, I left abruptly, questioning the world I lived in and my mother's perspective on forgiveness. Despite her history with my father, she seemed willing to overlook Jody's infidelity, which baffled me. I drove past my house without stopping, overwhelmed by the situation. I ended up at a car dealership, went inside, and tried to relax on a couch in the employee lounge. Despite my efforts, I couldn't calm my mind and ended up falling asleep around 5 a.m. I woke up at 10:30 to my boss's notice not to disturb me. He later called me to his office, where he offered me time off to assist the Jacobsons, an elderly couple I had previously sold a vehicle to. They needed help returning home from Vancouver after Mr. Jacobson's heart attack. I agreed to fly out the next day, and my boss arranged everything, advising me to take my time and delegate work to a colleague named Ben. Upon arriving in Vancouver, I visited Mr. Jacobson in the hospital, where both he and Mrs. Jacobson seemed in good spirits despite the situation. They clearly cherished each other's company and appeared grateful for it. As I stood there watching them happily, I realized I was smiling for the first time in a while. Mrs. Jacobson noticed me and greeted me warmly, giving me a hug. "Hi, Trey. How was the flight? Did you pick up Mr. Jacobson? Now hush, Robert. Remember what the doctor said?" Mrs. Jacobson joked, patting my arm. "I can silence him with doctor's orders," she added with a wink. We chatted while Mr. Jacobson drifted in and out of sleep. Nurses intermittently checked on him, adjusting his medications and monitoring his vitals. Mrs. Jacobson informed me about the location of the motor bus and mentioned that their granddaughter, who was about my age, would accompany me back. Their grandson had already flown home. As we finished our conversation, the granddaughter entered with packed suitcases. She was introduced as Darla and seemed indifferent to me, focusing on her grandmother instead. After conversing for a while, Mrs. Jacobson mentioned that Darla had been driving their car for the past week and would assist me in preparing the bus for departure. Darla began to object, but Mrs. Jacobson intervened, reassuring her and explaining Darla's decision not to return with me. Mrs. Jacobson also mentioned my boss's suggestion of possible extra days off and proposed considering a route through Yellowstone, as promised to Darla. I acknowledged and said I'd explore the options. Mrs. Jacobson handed me the letter, authorizing the bus crossing, and kissed my cheek, thanking me and urging caution. Darla and I then headed to the car and RV park. She drove, remaining silent despite my attempts at conversation. Upon arriving at the bus, she went inside, taking the keys with her. After retrieving them and a brief altercation, I hitched the car to the bus, ready for an early departure. I settled into a lawn chair in the carriage and took a moment to relax. Feeling thirsty, I stowed the chairs and table, then went inside to check for beer. Darla checked the fridge, snapping at me before retreating to the bedroom and slamming the door. That was the last straw. I was fed up with these women. Jody, Judy, my mother, and now Darla. Mrs. Jacobson was the only one showing any decency. After enduring 10 days of rudeness, I was determined to get the coach home quickly and minimize my time with Darla. I unplugged the power and water lines outside, then returned to the driver's seat, fired up the engine, set Houston, Texas in the GPS, and drove south. It was already 6 p.m., and I planned to wait until the next morning to start the car. But Darla's behavior changed my mind. By 8 a.m., I crossed the U.S. border and cleared customs. Darla had to step out for this, then returned to the bedroom. With full fuel tanks and a willing engine, we made good progress through the night, stopping twice for coffee and sandwiches. By 7 a.m., we reached Burley, Idaho. Darla, seated beside me, remained silent until she asked for food. Her request reignited my determination to finish the journey quickly. Recalling her previous attitude, I retorted, "I'm not your maid," and pressed harder on the gas pedal. She shot me a glare before storming back into the bedroom. Just before 9, I urgently needed to pee, so I stopped at a rest area. After using the bus restroom, I found her already stepping off the bus. "If you leave, you can't come back because I'm leaving," she threatened. I sat back down, released the parking brake, and shifted into gear just as she returned to the bedroom. By noon, my rear end was sore from driving for 18 hours straight. I parked between two 18-wheel trucks and laid down on the couch, quickly falling asleep. 5 hours later, I woke to the sound of the diesel engine and movement. She was behind the wheel, driving swiftly. I watched for a while and realized she knew what she was doing, likely thanks to her grandfather's teachings. After making coffee, I sat in the passenger seat silently for 2 hours. However, I grew concerned about our fuel level. Having driven for about 25 hours at an average speed of 60 miles per hour, we had covered approximately 1,500 miles and burned through most of our fuel. I suggested stopping for gas, but she had already taken care of it while I was sleeping. She was full of surprises. I returned to the couch and quickly fell back asleep. I didn't notice her leaving to use the bathroom or grab something to eat and drink. She must have managed everything while I slept for another 3 hours, impressed by her driving and control. Finally, around 10 in the evening, she stopped at a truck stop in Dumont, Texas. After preparing a sandwich and grabbing a soda, she disappeared into the bedroom, signaling my turn to drive. I made 2 chicken salad sandwiches and brewed coffee before taking over the driver's seat. I stopped once during the night for a restroom break and to grab some Cheetos and coffee. By 8 in the morning, I arrived at the Houston dealership, feeling exhausted but relieved to be done with her. After using the restroom for the first time since crossing U.S. Customs less than 40 hours earlier, I saw Jacobson's car leaving, with a rude gesture from the driver. I returned the gesture and decided to make coffee in the employee break room. Eventually, I succumbed to the couch's allure, not moving until 3 in the afternoon. I rose, yawned, and left my room to find a note instructing me to see my boss upon waking up. Entering his office, he mentioned complaints about my use of the break room. I mentioned a call from Mrs. Jacobson, piquing his interest. She was curious about how I managed to handle her difficult granddaughter during the trip home. Apparently, the granddaughter's behavior caused them inconvenience throughout the journey, even prompting the grandson to leave early. I confess that driving excessively helped me cope with the stress she caused. My boss chuckled at my honesty. He informed me that Mr. Jacobson would be discharged soon and wanted us to service the bus. We agreed and decided to keep the coach, as the Jacobsons were fond of it. He insisted I take a couple of days off to rest, citing the need to reclaim the break room for other employees. Though I'd only been away for 3 days, it felt much longer. I got home, had a much-needed shower, shaved, and hit the sack. I must have slept for about 30 hours over the next couple of days, but eventually I had to face reality. Figured the first thing to do was check my phone and catch up. It hadn't crossed my mind during those days. I started searching for it, rifling through the pockets of the clothes I wore to Vancouver, but no luck. Called up my boss, asked him to check the break room and coach's room, but nada. Dang. How many calls did I miss from customers? Made my way to the dealership, found a few customer messages and got cracking on them. By noon, I was back on track. Popped into the employee break room, fixed myself a coffee, and as I was heading back to my desk, in walked little Miss Godding. Sped off to the staff area, lay low for about 10 minutes until the loudspeaker chimed in. "Trey, to my office, please. Trey, to my office." Took my sweet time, sipping my coffee. "Trey, into my office, please." Knocked. "Come in." "Oh, hey, found you. I reckon you know Darla Jacobson. She was filling me in on the Canada trip." She sat silently. I glanced at him, puzzled. I'd already briefed him on the trip. A glimmer flickered in his eyes, a rare sight. Once during a stellar sales month at the dealership when he only saw dollar signs. Another when his twin sons snagged scholarships to UT. The guy was reveling in this. He smirked. "Miss Jacobson's here to hand back your phone. Seems you left it in her grandparents' car." His phone buzzed. "If you two don't mind, I gotta take this." She stood. I gestured for her to split. She headed to the showroom. I tailed at a discreet distance. She halted, so did I. She turned, extended her hand. My phone rested in her palm. Too far to snatch it, she advanced a couple steps. I retreated the same. A hint of a smile danced on her lips. Am I that awful? She moved to a nearby table, placing the phone. Yep. She stepped back. I grabbed the phone and made a beeline for the service area. Didn't even occur to me to say thanks. Trey. I halted, turning cautiously to face her. I overheard some of your messages. I couldn't help it. Heard them as they came in. You really came through for my grandparents, and you're dealing with your own stuff, Trey. I'm genuinely sorry for how I acted. With that, she exited the salon. Well, isn't that something? She had a soft side, and it seemed legit. I headed to my spot and took a seat. Only a couple of minutes passed when a loud rumble echoed from outside. I glanced toward the street to see at least 2 cars collided. Usually, I stay out of these things and let the pros handle it. But one of the salesmen who was outside came rushing in saying, Trey, I think that silver car belongs to the lady who was here to see you. Oh, damn. I sprinted to the accident scene. It was her. The medics hadn't arrived yet, but someone was trying to stop the bleeding from Darla's scalp. Another was tending to what looked like a broken arm. Darla looked my way and actually smiled this time. You always catch me at my finest moments. Then she passed out. Shortly after, the EMTs showed up, stabilizing Darla and the other car's passenger before transporting them to the hospital. I overheard them informing the police investigator of which hospital they were headed to. I returned to work. After about 15 minutes at my desk, I recalled the Jacobsons. I figured I should give them a call and update them on Darla's condition. I did so, reassuring them that she didn't seem to be in serious danger, just some cuts, bruises, and possibly a broken arm. But overall, she seemed all right. I heard Mrs. Jacobson relay this to her husband, followed by his response. A broken arm. Too bad it wasn't her neck. That might have knocked some sense into her, once the husband had received his due punishment. Mrs. Jacobson then asked me to contact Darla's parents and inform them. She provided me with their number and I made the call. Then I remembered my cell phone. There were 54 messages, half from my mother, the rest from Judy, potential clients, and one from Michael Hamilton. I reached out to the potential clients and arranged 4 appointments for the upcoming days. The rest I disregarded. I wrapped up work at 5 and headed home. The hospital the ER doctor mentioned was conveniently close to my house, yet I found myself there nonetheless. At the information desk, I discovered her room number, 646. Making my way there, I found she already had visitors, her parents. Trey, I want you to meet my parents. Mom, Dad, this is Trey Taylor. Trey, my parents are Ralph and Joanna Jacobson. Pleasure to meet you, Trey. Darla can't stop raving about your trip, her mother mentioned. I bet she can't. I mean, how did you manage 2 days with her on that cramped bus? She would have driven me nuts, her father chimed in. It's not just any bus, Dad. It's an inner-city bus. It's still a bus. A fancy one, but a bus nonetheless. Ignore him, Trey. How are you holding up? All right, aside from a busted arm and a few stitches. Well, I should get going. Just wanted to check on you. Take care. Thanks for coming by. Oh, Trey, her father added. Thanks for reaching out to my parents and us. No problem. See you later. I headed home, pondering whether to call my mother. The debate didn't last long. The cons outweighed the pros, so I refrained. This went on for about 3 weeks. My mother and Judy kept trying to reach me, but I ignored them. Even my stepfather rang. I spoke briefly, cutting it short when he tried passing me to my mother. My lawyer sent the divorce papers to Judy's address. Apparently, she was content with Morrison, signing in bold red marker, no mention of her supposed pregnancy. In 2 months, I'd likely be single again. I was contemplating the merits of bachelorhood. The thought triggered other reflections, like my prolonged celibacy. It had been a dry spell. I lingered for only a moment before heading to the bathroom for a shower, preparing for dinner. Just as I finished dressing, the phone rang. Trey Taylor. Hi, Trey, it's Dottie Jacobson. Well, hello there, Dottie. How are you? And how's the patient? Call me Dottie, Trey. He's doing great. Actually, better than great. We're already planning our next trip, and he's set on Colorado. But I'm a bit nervous about him driving in the mountains. What do you think, Dottie? Our trainer won't let him get into trouble. Just needs to use the Jake brake and keep within the speed limit. That's what he's saying. Been researching mountain driving and is really excited to try it. I might need some Valium before we go, she chuckled. From what I knew of them, they'd go anywhere together, anytime. I admired that about them. Anyway, calling to invite you to a little barbecue celebrating Robert's recovery. It's at our place this Friday at 6 o'clock. Bring your wife. We'd love to meet her. It struck me that I had never discussed my personal life with them, and apparently Darla hadn't either, hearing some of my messages, so they were unaware of my impending divorce. Thanks, Dottie. I'd be delighted to join. See you then. It had been a fantastic week. Usually selling one van a week is cause for joy, but this week I managed to sell 3. One was a high-end used bus owned by a country music star, which they upgraded to a newer, pricier model. My commission for the week was exceptional. Really, really, really exceptional. Arriving at Jacobson's estate promptly at 6, I noticed a spacious garage beside the main house where I realized they kept their boat, which I had transported from Vancouver. It had been serviced, cleaned, and returned by the service department. I knew they were wealthy, having cut a hefty check for the carriage house, but their estate was truly impressive. As the valet parked my car, I couldn't help but marvel. Despite attending 6 county fairs and goat races, I had never before had my car parked by a valet at a private home. Led through the house to the backyard, I found about 50 people already gathered. Dottie spotted me and greeted me with a hug, inquiring about my wife. I explained the divorce proceedings, to which she responded by holding me at arm's length and declaring my wife an idiot. She then wrapped her arm around my waist and escorted me to the other guests. Listen, Trey, whenever you're ready, I know some lovely young ladies who would be thrilled to meet someone like you, she advised. Introducing me to the rest of the guests as a friend rather than the carriage seller, I realized I was in esteemed company. Any potential introductions to nice young ladies seemed out of my league. Deciding to stay for only a brief moment, I soon made my exit. I was just wrapping up my brisket sandwich and beer, scanning for Dottie and Robert to bid farewell, when I spotted Darla darting away from some guy. I hadn't realized she was here, though I probably should have guessed. Recognizing that familiar look, I wanted no part of it, so I turned away to avoid her gaze. But it was too late. Come on, Trey, she insisted, seizing my hand. First Dottie, now Darla, a family of hand-grabbers. She guided me inside to the library. A freaking library in this house. This guy's a damn idiot, she vented. I've got issues and need help. I started to leave. Where are you going? Out, before you throw me out. Because I agree with him. He shouldn't have said that aloud and in public. But someone had to. Damn it, Trey. You're supposed to be on my side. Why? The only kind words you ever said to me were uttered while you were lying in the street bleeding and probably delirious. She slumped rather than sat. I remained standing. Neither of us met the other's gaze. How's the arm? I inquired. It itches like crazy under the cast. I have to carry this so I can scratch it. She produced what resembled a back scratcher from the cast tiny fingers to fit between the cast and her hand for reaching the itch. I'll be relieved when this thing comes off. She gestured to the cast. I've got to run. Trey? Yeah? If I promise to behave, will you have dinner with me? After a brief pause, I replied, Darla, I'm going through a divorce, so I don't need the added stress. And I'm likely to say or do something that'll upset you and make matters worse. So I don't think dinner's a good idea. Saturday morning, I departed. My mom rang the doorbell and I welcomed her in. Here's the deal, she began. I've thought it over carefully, and I agree with you. There are things we must compromise on and things we shouldn't. Faithfulness in marriage falls under the non-negotiables. You reminded me of the hell I went through with your father, and no one should endure that. I apologize for even considering you getting back with Jody. It was selfish, only thinking about the baby and the possibility of having a grandchild. Please forgive me. I forgave her, and we embraced. After chatting for another hour, we hugged again, and she departed. Mid-morning on Monday, my phone rang. Trey Taylor. Good morning, Trey. It's Michael Hamilton. I have news. I wasn't used to him calling me by my first name, but I shrugged it off. What's the news? Stan Morrison asked for his job back. They turned him down, I chuckled. Just thought you'd like to know. Thanks, Michael. We're on a first-name basis now. Shortly before noon, Jacobson's carriage pulled up, parking in front of the building. Engaged with customers, I couldn't greet them, but I caught a glimpse. I spent at least 30 minutes chatting with potential clients, but no one disembarked from the carriage. Escorting them to their car, I then approached the carriage and rang the doorbell. Darla welcomed me in. Stepping inside, the door was beside the passenger seat, with 3 or 4 steps leading up. Upon climbing, one had to turn left immediately to avoid the driver's seat. When the bus was in motion and passengers seated, the floor would cover the steps to prevent dangling feet. Anyway, I stepped into the coach and followed her to the living room. "Have a seat," she offered. I complied, greeted by the delightful aroma of lasagna emanating from the oven. 2 wine glasses adorned the kitchen counter. She handed one to me and took the other for herself, gesturing for a toast. We clinked glasses and each took a sip of the very good Chianti. I hadn't spoken until then. Leaning against the stove, she recoiled from the heat before readjusting her position against the counter, taking another sizable sip. "You said you couldn't do dinner, so I figured lunch would suffice. Plus, I didn't want to risk embarrassing or angering you in public, so I opted for privacy. I asked my grandparents if I could use the coach, and after explaining, they agreed. Though Grandpa made me promise not to drive back when I got mad. Notice I said when, not if. He knows you well, doesn't he?" Rather than the expected eruption on her flushed face, she simply took another large sip of her Chianti. Her face reddened, but she remained composed. I followed suit with my own sip. She turned away momentarily, replenishing her glass, then took a deep breath and faced me again. "I hope you're hungry. I made it this morning. My lasagna is delicious, even if I do say so myself." She busied herself with the salad and garlic bread, impressively managing despite her casted arm. The doorbell interrupted. "Bring it in, please," she instructed. I rose, approached the door panel, and pressed the button. It slid open, revealing my boss. He glanced at me. "It's fine," I assured him, meeting his gaze briefly. After closing the door, I returned to my chair and wine, observing her enjoyment of the meal. Her movements were natural, showcasing her kitchen expertise, even in this compact space. I smiled briefly, knowing that sooner or later, one of us would likely do something to irk the other. It was only a matter of time. She directed me to the dining room table, where I settled. Typically, a 45-foot long and 8.5-foot wide bus didn't offer much interior space. However, with sliding drawers, the living room and bedroom expanded to about 11 feet wide. The living area began just behind the driver and passenger seats, followed by the dining room and kitchen across from each other, then the bathroom and shower, and finally, the bedroom at the rear of the bus. We dined, conversed, and polished off a bottle of Chianti. Remarkably, neither of us had managed to upset the other. After a couple of hours, I decided it was time to return to work. "Darla, thank you. It was a delightful surprise. And the food was excellent." "My pleasure," she replied. Heading for the door, she followed. "I took a step down to leave, Trey," she mentioned. I glanced back at her. Leaning over, she planted a soft, gentle kiss on my lips. Both of us were taken aback. A moment of silence passed as we exchanged looks. "Is dinner still off the table?" she inquired, a twinkle in her eyes. "How about tonight?" "I'd love to accept. 7 o'clock, just a few hours away." She provided her address, and as I made to leave, we shared more kisses, prolonging my departure by another 10 minutes. When I finally stepped off the bus, I noticed 6 faces peering through the exhibit hall window, including my boss. Spotting me, they scattered, except for my boss, who opened the door as I approached. "Well, I'm heading home to prepare for my date tonight," I announced, and we shared a laugh. 10 minutes later, Darla drove the bus out of the parking lot. I was en route to her house when my phone rang. Trey Taylor. "So you two managed to keep it civil, huh?" "Hey, Dottie, I reckon Robert's tuning in." "You bet he is." "I'm here. We've heard her side of the story. Now it's your turn." I chuckled. "You know, a gentleman never spills the beans." "Quiet down, Robert." "Trey." It was amusing when she requested to borrow the coach. She was jittery and reluctant to spill the beans on why she needed it. But Robert insisted she spill the beans before he'd let her borrow it. So she did just as she's telling us. She got all excited and spilled about the lasagna she whipped up. I asked her how she knew you were a fan of lasagna. "I just had a hunch, Grandma." And she blushed. "Trey, I've known this girl all my life, and I never realized she could blush, but she did." "Trey," Robert picked up on that. "I can't believe I'm saying this, especially considering that girl's crummy attitude." "Robert, mind your language." "Yeah, dear. Anyhow, Trey, as far as I'm aware, that girl's never pulled a stunt like this. She might rub me the wrong way, Robert." "I apologize. She might rub me the wrong way, but she's still my granddaughter. So you better treat her right. Do you understand?" "Yes, sir, but I reckon you're overreacting a tad." "Nonsense. Sorry, Dottie. Trey, just keep your hands off her, okay? She's had some rough experiences in relationships. She's, as you know, quite fetching. Seems like all her life, men have been trying to take advantage of her. It started back in high school and she's struggled to cope. Unfortunately, her attitude serves as her defense mechanism, keeping folks at arm's length to avoid disappointment. Trouble is, she struggles to tell friends from foes. But it's all just a front. There's a good girl in there somewhere. Sometimes, it's just hard to find her. Dottie says I won't hurt her. Dottie and Robert approve, they chime together. But you've asked her not to hurt me. And we all had a good laugh. Before I could finish speaking, my phone buzzed again. Trey Taylor. Trey, it's Judy. Silence. My mood shifted from content to enraged in an instant. Despite my anger, I opted to hear her out. Are you still there? What do you want, Judy? I thought you should know that. Jody, cut it out. I don't want to hear anything about her. Trey, please, just listen for a moment. Yesterday, she threw Stan out for cheating. Today, he returned and assaulted her. She's in the hospital, Trey. Her nose is broken. He knocked her down and kicked her. She's in critical condition and Stan is behind bars. What about the baby? Gone. She fabricated the pregnancy to manipulate you into taking her back. Well, she sure fooled my mom. She fooled us all. Trey, I'm sorry she's hurt, but it's no longer my concern. Morrison, as far as I'm concerned, can rot in jail. She's still legally your wife until the divorce is finalized. She ceased being my wife when she got into his car and made the divorce official, when she signed the papers. Whatever's happening in her life now has nothing to do with me. Farewell. Darla resided in a gated community. Given her grandparents' estate, this wasn't surprising, but the guard's reaction at the gate was unexpected. Upon disclosing my visit, he chuckled. He continued laughing as he contacted her to confirm my arrival and chuckled again when he opened the gate. As I exited 15 minutes later, he was still on the phone, laughing. It seemed she wasn't the most pleasant person in that circle. I discovered her preference for hearty fare. She opted for a medium-rare ribeye steak with blue cheese, butter, and baked potatoes. Just my style. I briefly pondered how she'd managed to cut the steak with her arm in a cast, but she handled it. We shared a laugh over the awkwardness, and I even offered to assist, though she declined. She ate about half the steak before focusing on her drink. The waiter suggested boxing up the leftovers. I didn't realize you offered takeout here. There's a first time for everything, he quipped. As we arrived at the security gate to input the password, the same guard greeted us with a look of surprise instead of his usual laughter. I quipped to Darla, I don't go on many dates, so he's not accustomed to seeing me return in the same car I left in. Usually I opt for a cab ride home. That just seemed like the sensible choice to me. Upon reaching her house, she welcomed me inside. What can I get you to drink? A gin and tonic. We sat quietly, sipping our drinks. Eventually, she rose from her seat and approached me, dropping a subtle hint. I caught her drift, and we engaged in deeper conversation. I believe we should take more time to get to know each other better, don't you agree? And so we did. The next morning at 9, I phoned my boss to inform him of my absence. Why's that? Still on your date from last night? He chuckled.